And so I'm bringing up our panelists, and we're starting with Ms. Lydia Tucker Arnold, who is a former Clark College student. She was a Clark College student and served as secretary of the student body in 1960. And I'm asking our young men to help escort our panelists up to the stage, please. In March 1960, Ms. Lydia Tucker, at that time, and other students participated in the sit-ins, and she was arrested and jailed for 2 weeks. She graduated with honors from Booker T. Washington High School in 1957, graduated from Clark Atlanta University with a bachelor's degree in elementary education in 1961, and a master's degree in religion education from the Interdenominational Theological Center. Ms. Tucker Arnold, welcome. Our next panelist is Mr. Charles Black, former Morehouse College student, a native of Miami, Florida. Mr. Black is an alum of Morehouse College, where he was a member of the varsity debate team, editor of the college newspaper, president of the senior class, and chairman of the Atlanta student movement, 1961 and 1962, and he inherited that chairmanship from Lonnie King. He was one of only 8 students who was taught by Martin Luther King Jr. when he taught at Morehouse College. And he is a veteran actor in various media. You've probably seen his face on a number of films. Okay. He also was past editor of the Atlanta Inquirer newspaper, past CEO of a national consulting firm, Frontiers Unlimited, and he has been an advisor for numerous civic, political, and social justice campaigns. Welcome, Mr. Black. Our next panelist is Dr. Gwendolyn Middlebrooks, a former Spelman College student. Dr. Middlebrooks was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and at the age of 9 moved with her family to Atlanta, Georgia. She graduated from David T. Howard High School in the Atlanta public school system. She graduated from Spelman College in 1961 with a BS degree. She went to Springfield College in 1966 and Georgia State University in 1979 for her PhD in educational leadership. At Springfield College, she earned her master's degree. She began her career as a teacher in the Atlanta public school system, and then she worked as a faculty member at Spelman from 1963 to 64, and then returned to Spelman, where she was on the faculty from 1968 to 2009. Welcome, Dr. Middlebrooks. Our next panelist is Ms. Marilyn Pryce Hoytt. Ms. Pryce Hoytt is an author, and actually you'll have an opportunity to purchase her book when we go out for the book signing and DVD signing. She is a mother and a businesswoman, a retired Tuskegee University French professor, and founder of Pryce Learning Systems, Incorporated. As a student at Spelman, she majored in drama and minored in French. In 1961, she received a prestigious scholarship to study in Paris, France, and she lived and worked in Ethiopia. She grew up on the Tuskegee, at that time, Institute campus in Tuskegee, Alabama, and she has inherited and passes on to others that Tuskegee spirit of service, dedication, and history. There's this iconic picture of Lonnie King and Dr. Martin Luther King and the young lady. You saw it in the documentary, and there's a young woman standing proudly, looking beautiful and confident between Martin Luther King Jr. and Lonnie King. That was Ms. Marilyn Pryce Hoytt. Welcome, panelists, and now I'm turning things over to our moderator, filmmaker, Althea Brown.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Julius, would you like to come up and join us? Julius is, I guess he would call himself one of the foot soldiers, too. Huh? Excuse me? Yes. One of the foot soldiers of the movement, Julius Cole. Thank you ever so much. I'm so happy to see you. Glad you were able to come. I'm going to start off with allowing them to tell you a little bit about themselves, a little background, but most importantly, why? Why did you get involved? Why did you get involved in this movement? Lydia, start off.
I'm hesitating because I'm thinking about the question, why did I get involved? I told my daughter-in-law, who is also here with us tonight, that it was not a decision that I made. Going to jail for 2 weeks and walking around the state capitol with the Ku Klux Klan in full dress walking beside us, and one person was, the one who was walking beside me was very tall and had piercing, ugly eyes. You know, if you look at a person, you can really tell something about that person's eyes. This was frightening to me. It was frightening when I went to jail, and had not God tapped me on the shoulder and said, I want you to do this, I would not have been involved. But I am glad that I was chosen to do it. I learned a lot, and that would be another chapter, and I'm going to tell you about it real quickly before the other people speak. There was a lady in jail with us. Gwen and I were in jail at the same time. There were 32 of us. There were 32 students who we did choose to go to jail. Didn't know what we were doing. We really didn't know what we were doing. The lessons have come back to us since that time. But this lady was 25 years of age, and she had attacked her husband and injured him very badly, beat his head all up, injured him very badly. I was really afraid of her. And I made sure if she was sitting on this side of the room, I was way down there where Julius was. And she never attacked any of us. She would try to talk to us, and we tried to talk to her. But there were lessons that we learned from this lady really needed help, and they took her out of the cell before any of us left. So there were many other lessons like that. So I'm glad God tapped me on the shoulder.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Charles A. Black, and as you can see, I am A. Black.
It's on.
I came to Morehouse from Miami, Florida, where our racism was a bit more polite than a lot of the rest of the South. We did have signs up, and you knew your place down there, but I don't ever recall being called by that N-word growing up in Miami. I'd never seen a Confederate flag on public display growing up in Miami. The first thing that I saw out of the train window arriving in Atlanta, Georgia, was a large Confederate flag painted on the side of a building. It freaked me out. I knew for one thing that flag had been outlawed after the Civil War, but there it was. Uh, our generation succeeded what Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. Those were the Americans who went overseas and fought a whole bunch of other folk to make the world, quote, safe for democracy. Our parents' generation were those people who came back to their homes in this country to be treated like dirt and called awful names and denied the common rights of citizenship. When at the same time, German soldiers who were brought over here were allowed to go to all of the places that the black American soldiers could not go. So as Lydia mentioned in the film, the title of Dr. King's book, Dr. Mays' book, Born to Rebel, we were born to rebel. We were born already teed off. I think I can say teed off, right? So when the opportunity came to make what we saw as revolutionary as opposed to evolutionary change in the circumstances, we were ready. I was arrested on this date 62 years ago at the terminal train station, which was my first stop in Atlanta. There was a large group of us. I led half of the group, and Martin Luther King's brother, A.D. Williams King, led the other half into the, quote, white waiting room. We were all arrested and sentenced to 10 days at the city farm. At the city farm, which is someplace I have no idea where it is. I have not been looking for it again. It was on Key Road, wherever that is. The boys and girls were separated. We were in a very large hall with all the other guys that we didn't know who they were and why they were there. But they had seen us on television and knew that that's why we were there, as Julian mentioned in the film. We were all awakened at 4:30 in the morning, and the boys were loaded onto trucks and taken out to a cabbage field to hoe weeds from around the plants. And the girls sat on the ground outside of the facility to peel potatoes. And the stuff they gave us to eat, you wouldn't feed to your dog. We were there for only 4 days before the outcry in the community and the nation was such that they released us from the jail. But before we were sent out there, we were in the downtown filthy jail, and you had a chance to make a phone call. And I called my mother in Miami, and much to my amazement, she told me that I told your daddy that you were probably one of those kids, which surprised me because I never thought I would be one of those kids doing any such thing as that. I came up here to date girls from Spelman. I was a willie. And none of you know what a willie is now, but I have to tell you that. When we were in school, the dinner line at Morehouse closed at 6 o'clock. Visiting hours at Spelman ended at 6 o'clock. So that was a problem. You're trying to get that last little hug or kiss, whatever, and make it to your line before Pop Warner closed the line. And so you would be running across campus. And if you were dating a senior, the senior dorm was way at the end down there. What was the name of that dorm? Abbey, yeah. And so you run in from that dorm trying to make it to Robert Hall to the lunch line by 6 o'clock. And so the word was, will he make it? And so we were known as Willies. I was a Willie. So that's what I came up here for. They wouldn't let me in Spelman, so I accepted a scholarship at Morehouse. But anyhow, that's why we were here.
Right. You don't get away with using a phrase like polite racism. You're leaving us hanging. Please explain polite racism before I say anything. You said that was polite racism.
Well, Miami was a rather cosmopolitan city in that a lot of the white folk down there were what they call snowbirds. They were from the north and had second homes in Florida, and some had moved down there. So a large percentage of the white population was not southern whites from, like Alabama and Mississippi and the like. You also had folk from the Caribbean, folk from the Bahamas, folk from Puerto Rico, and a large Jewish community. Miami Beach was all pretty much Jewish. So, folk were not as rude and crude to you in their denial of opportunity.
Polite racism.
Yeah, that's polite racism. Right.
Okay. You never get too old to learn.
You might.
Right.
You might.
When you're deprived of something, we were talking almost about this Sunday when we were talking about Lent. We lived at a time where we had been deprived for years of just basic freedoms. Can you imagine living where you can't go to certain restaurants and theaters? You're just absolutely deprived, and your parents are always telling you, ministers and other people who try to encourage you, that everything is all right. You're all right. You're just as good as anybody else. They're trying to buffer and encourage you, but you live not having certain things that you see other people accessing and using. All of us were in the same boat, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless as to where you live.
Gwen, the mic.
Regardless as to where you lived, what kind of job your parents had. We were all missing a lot of things that white people had in society. And so when an opportunity comes, why not? We were doing things and taking chances. In our community, one day we had been talking about it for months in groups. We had to ride the bus to school. Been talking about the fact that the law said we couldn't sit next to them on a bus, but didn't say we couldn't put something in the seat next to them. So we decided to start putting our books in the seat next to them. And we did it systematically for a week. I don't know who started it, because the Negro boys would let the girls get on the bus first, so we were always at the back. I was standing there one day holding on the bus, and somebody bumped me and gave me some books, and I gave them to the next person. We piled them in the seat, because the white people would sit next to the wall of the bus, so they wouldn't be close to the aisle and close to those of us who had to stand. So you still couldn't sit down, even though you had the right to sit in the back of the bus, because they were rolled up all the way to the back. We did that for a week, piling our books in the seats next to them. And it was amazing that Monday morning when the bus stopped and we got on the bus, all of the white people were seated to the front. So we were taking chances, doing things. It was amazing how we felt. We had accomplished something in a passive, quiet, polite way. Like Charles said, when I called from the jail to tell my mother I was in jail, she said, when I heard it on the radio, I knew you were there. We were really dissatisfied. It was really not a good way to live. If you can put yourselves in our shoes going downtown and not being able to try on shoes. If you didn't go window shopping, there were no malls at that time. So you didn't go downtown unless you had money to buy something, because if you went in a store and you were my color, people thought you were going to steal if you didn't have money to buy. So your parents didn't let you go shopping. Mine didn't, unless they went with me. We weren't allowed to go in certain places. If the restaurant wouldn't let you come in and sit down and eat, you didn't go to the window in the back to get a takeout. So with all of this experience for years, and the death of Emmett Till, listening to that in church, Why not? When somebody gives you an opportunity to participate in something that will help change some of that, you don't have to think about it because you've been thinking about it for years. Actually, I was on my way back to Spelman's campus, met Lionel King when we were in high school. He was a senior, I was in 8th grade. He was running for president of the student body against Vernon Jordan, and was very nice to all the 8th graders. You know, we outnumbered the upperclassmen. And because he was nice to us, we voted for him and he won. He was also a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church, so I knew him. So I really, in fact, was not following a stranger when he stopped me as I was on my way back to Spelman's campus and said, would you help us out by coming to a meeting tonight and then going to Spelman's campus, knocking on all the dorms and encouraging the students to come with us to sit in tomorrow. And so I just said yes without hesitation. And that's how I got involved. All of that night, I stayed up knocking on different room doors in different dorms, asking the girls if they would please go with us to sit in. Couldn't tell them where, couldn't tell them exactly what time because they didn't give us that information. But he did tell me that we were all supposed to be dressed business casual and to bring a tote bag with some toilet articles in case you were arrested. You will notice, I noticed that as I looked at the film. You didn't see anyone in blue jeans. You saw people dressed business casual in suits or sport shirts and things like that. So that's how I got involved, following someone that I knew, and because I had felt deprived all of my life because of my race and the way I was treated.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Marilyn, Pryce, Hoytt, and I was not in the film. I was not in the film because I was not one of the organizers. I was a foot soldier. And I'm going to tell you why. I'm not from Atlanta. I grew up in Tuskegee Institute, Alabama, on the campus of Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University. That was a haven for black people in those days. We had swimming on the campus, we had movies on the campus, tennis on the campus, and we did not experience firsthand segregation on a daily basis. We were taught in our school on the campus that we were as good as or probably better than anybody else. And our teachers believed this, our parents reinforced this. But at the same time, as a child, I grew up during the Montgomery bus boycott. And I remember my mother driving us to Montgomery to buy clothes. And if she saw someone on the side of the road that needed a ride, she would pull over and give them a ride because that's what that boycott was about. You did not ride the bus. And the first carpool was formed in Montgomery so that people could stop at Dexter Avenue or wherever they stopped for the carpool and get a ride to their job or to their school. That spirit was in me. In Tuskegee, Alabama, we had an economic boycott shortly after the Montgomery bus boycott. You don't hear much about that. For one reason, the legislature in Alabama outlawed the word boycott. You couldn't use that word. Can you imagine? If you use the word, and we're seeing something like that happening again today. So I want you young people to take note. Now you see us sitting up here telling our story from 60-some years ago. But it's your turn now. Do you hear me? It's on you. So let me finish my story about this boycott, which we had to call a Shop with Your Friends campaign. What had happened was a dirty word that we have heard again. I never thought I'd hear this word again after 1957. Gerrymander. In Tuskegee, in Macon County, black people wanted to vote. Now, we voted previously during Reconstruction, and as a result, a man who was running for office said to a leader of the community, he said, if you will give me the black vote, I will get you money to start a school. And that was how Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute was begun. And they invited Booker T. Washington to come to that school, and he worked miracles. So there, one of the things he taught people was you need to have a pig, you need to have a garden, and you should have a business. So in Tuskegee Institute, people had businesses. So once the gerrymander outlawed all of the black people, just about, in the city, cut us out of the city altogether. You couldn't vote if you weren't a citizen in the city. So this gerrymander made the inhabitants of Tuskegee angry. And they'd already been working toward what you see today. They'd been working for the right to vote. And so the leaders decided, we're not going to shop with these people who have the stores downtown. We spend our money, but they will not stand up against this gerrymander. So let's stop spending our money and spend it with our friends in the black community. And this happened. And business after business closed in Tuskegee. People were willing to sacrifice what they had built with their own hands just to maintain segregation and to support the gerrymander. Do you see a parallel with what we have today? So this spirit was in me. And when I came to Spelman College as a drama major, I wanted to be on the stage. I love being on the stage, as you can see. In the sophomore year, a call went out. Herschel Sullivan, I do believe it was Herschel. She came into the dining hall at Spelman and she said, there will be a mass meeting in Giles Hall, all university students, and my roommates and I. And in my book, I tell this story because it's told, I was 19 years old on the cover. This was the picture that appeared on the front page, one of these pictures, on the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution the following morning after the sit-in. And so Herschel came in and she said, there will be AU Center students, and we thought, my roommates and I, just to show you how silly we were, ooh, cute guys. And so we went back to the dorm and we got all dressed up and went to this meeting, and when we got there were people like these, and they were deadly serious. And we said, uh-oh, this is not about cute guys like Julius. And they said, we're going to have a sit-in tomorrow. And if you want to go to jail for 6 months, you're not afraid to be arrested, you move to the right side of the room. My roommates and I immediately went to the right side. We had a fourth roommate who stayed over on the left. They said, if you don't want to get arrested, but you're going to support us, you go to the left side. So, of course, we teased her that evening back in the dorm. But that morning, we assembled in front of the Atlanta University Library, Trevor Arnett Library. And we had prayer. We sang, "We Shall Overcome." And then Lonnie King said, Marilyn, Pryce, you and Blondine Orbert, go get in that car. And we got in the car. We didn't know. I think there was a gentleman sitting in the front seat with a hat on. We didn't know that was Martin Luther King because we were not from Atlanta. I had seen him at some of the mass meetings in Tuskegee. And we rode down to Rich's department store. Now, being from Tuskegee, my parents would take the train or drive up to Atlanta to shop in Rich's department store because it was considered a very fine store. And if you had to have an after 5 or an evening gown, you rode up to the 6th floor. And when the elevator doors would open, you would see this magnificent, to us, Magnolia Tea Room. And there were the little ladies with their hats and their gloves and the white tablecloths and the crystal and the silver. And oh, it just looked like the most wonderful place to dine. But we couldn't go in there. We could walk down the hall, go to where the evening gowns were being sold and buy them. If we wanted to eat a meal, we had to go down to the basement. And they had a little snack bar. But as you were eating your chicken salad sandwich, the doors to the toilet opened and whoof, you got a whiff of very unpleasant air. And it was degrading. It was dehumanizing to have to suffer that way after you had spent your money or your parents' money. And my mother, Lydia Smith Pryce, even went up to speak to Richard Rich. And the receptionist said, well, you can't speak with Mr. Rich. She said, well, you give him this message. He has us eating down there in the basement next to the toilet. And the receptionist said, well, at least he gives y'all a place to eat. And my mother said, well, listen, you tell Mr. Rich that when he gets to heaven, he's going to have to pay for what he's doing to us. So that spirit was in me also. So the question that you asked, why was I willing to go to jail? I think I have answered that question. And when I called my father, and I told him I was in jail for 6 months, he said, now, Patty, you're going to have to do some studying. You can't get behind in your classes. He said, but I'm proud of you. And I said, yeah. Now, talk to your mother. Ooh, it was a different story. She nearly died. To think about her daughter, her older daughter, going to jail. Do you know what that meant back then? For a young black woman to go to jail where anybody could have access to your body. It was frightening, but we were not afraid. And if we had to do it again, I think we would do it again, but it's your turn now. Thank you.
Well, I'm from Atlanta, born, reared, and educated at Washington High School, and came to Morehouse after graduating from Washington High School. And I had the opportunity to be involved in student politics in my freshman year at Morehouse, and being involved with foreign students coming from different nationalities, and being involved in some of my classes like Dr. Newsom in sociology, and sitting in chapel where we had to go to chapel every day, listening to Mays and Dr. Willie coming from Harvard, and all of these great people talking about what we have to do to be achievers in our society and how we had to be ahead. We had to be the best of the best. So encouraging us to study hard and to work hard, and then eventually we will be able to overcome racism per se. One thing that I experienced as living in Atlanta in a very segregated society was in the 10th grade, we had a presentation from an organization called Moral Rearmament. They came to Atlanta. For the first time in my life, I sat in the Atlanta Civic Auditorium with people from all over the world, talking about living together harmoniously in a society and a world with peace and racial harmony. And I said, I want to be a part of that world. And I identified myself as saying, this racist society has to go in the long run, and it can't continue. So when I came to Morehouse, I got very actively involved in politics and listening to professors and so forth, talking about different things. So it inspired me in the long run. I ran for student government. In my freshman year, I got elected as the secretary of the student government for my sophomore year, and I met people like Marilyn Pryce, who was a beautiful young lady at Spelman, and she was very actively involved in all of these things in politics at Spelman and so forth. And we were also involved in the Canterbury House. And a lot of people came to the Canterbury House, which was the Episcopal Church gathering place, like Julian Bond. Everybody came to the Canterbury House. And Father Scott was one of those people who wanted to encourage us, and was a place where students could meet and interchange and interact And even sometimes they even brought students from Agnes Scott and Georgia Tech in what they call the Intercollegiate Association of Colleges in Atlanta for white and black students to meet together. Very often we would meet, but we couldn't go to Georgia Tech's campus, we couldn't go to Agnes Scott's campus, but we would party together afterwards when the chaperones from Agnes Scott were not there, the international students and so forth, and we very often would party together as students and trying to gain a better understanding apart from that sort of social world that we were living in. And one of the experiences that I had, that wasn't mentioned here today, was a place where all of the civil rights people were trained in nonviolence. It was called Monteagle. It was the place where the white people called the Communist Training Camp in Monteagle, Tennessee. And I was sent there because I was a student leader to be trained in nonviolence. I met John Lewis there. I met a lot of people of the student, Vivian, all the people in the student movement from Nashville were there being trained at this Monteagle Training Center. And so I was one of the young students in my sophomore year to go to Monteagle. And I came back to Atlanta very militant in wanting to bring about change. So when the Giles Hall meeting was there, I was in that meeting, I remember it very well. And I was one of those ones who didn't go on the right, but I was on the left, in the sense that my mother was a school teacher here in Atlanta, and my father worked for the federal government, and both of them were very afraid that if I got arrested that they would lose their jobs. So they said, you can be involved and be active in the student movement, but don't get arrested, don't go to jail, because we will probably lose our jobs if we did that. So what role did I play? I participated in all the demonstrations and the Riches, the Ku Klux Klan on Forsyth Street, and all down in that area where the Klan was on one side of the street, the students were on the other side. The integration of the state capitol with one of my professors, Dr. Ovid Futch from the history department in Morehouse. We integrated for the first time the gallery of the state capitol. I mean, we did all kinds of things, and I was a driver. I was one of those lurkout people that talked on the telephones and called back and reported on what situations were. I drove students to integrate the Pickerick restaurant, which Lester Maddox owned, with his axe handles. And I had a car at that time because I was a city student. And so I drove the students when they had to be transported from one area to another to carry out demonstrations and to go and report back what was happening to the leaders of the movement, because they were there trying to find out what was going on and to make sure that nobody was hurt or injured in that process. So I didn't go to jail and felt very guilty about that. But in the long run, I did participate, but I was a soldier, as they say, in the movement. And that was a very good experience for me. I, like Marilyn, eventually got a chance to go abroad and to travel to Africa, in the Crossroads, Africa. Lived in Africa for a summer, came back. Marilyn had left and gone to Paris already. She had been selected as a Merrill Scholar. Well, we lost one of the most attractive women at Spelman at that time, I was at. And so when I went to Europe, the next year, at the same scholarship that she had, she was already gone. And so I had a whole experience of living and travel in Europe, from Russia to Portugal, from Finnish Lapland to Africa, and seeing what the world was really like, almost to the point where I didn't come back to the United States. I wanted to stay in Europe because I felt for the first time that I was a free individual. But I came back to Morehouse, and it was very difficult coming back that senior year, still living in a segregated environment. When Martin Luther King gave his speech on the March on Washington, I happened to be in Greece on my way traveling back to Den Haag, to Rotterdam, to take the boat. And I said that we've been dreaming too damn long. That was my reaction to Martin Luther King's speech at that point, because I felt really liberated in the point that I was a human being and not as a serf that I had been treated here in the city of Atlanta. But because of my parents, I would not disappoint them that I would not graduate from college. I came back to the United States. But it was very, very difficult, very difficult. Marilyn did the same thing. She didn't talk about it, but she talks about it in her book, that she came back to Spelman, but was so dissatisfied with the environment that she went back to Europe and got her degree sooner by doing that. But those of us who were fortunate enough to get away from this environment had a very different experience, but a very difficult experience reintegrating back into American society after having a chance to associate with whom we wanted to go where we wanted to do, and to do whatever we wanted to do. And that, to come back to a segregated society in the United States, was a really very difficult experience for me, and I'm sure it was for her also.
You've heard their stories. Do you have questions for them? Are there any questions that we can ask the panelists here? If so, please come down to the mic so others can hear you. Just quickly. What's my time? You have a question?
While we're waiting for questions, I always wonder when I'm on a panel, we've been on a few, how you're feeling about what we did. How are you feeling encouraged? I always hope that the fact that we did something as students, as very young people, will make you feel empowered. I know when I was, before the student movement, when I was in college, I didn't feel I had the ability to do anything about what was going on. But the student movement taught me what it meant to be united. If there were other people who had the same ideas that I had, who had the same feelings I had, we could move mountains, we could make a change. We were very daring, and I always want young people in audiences to feel empowered. It took a while for me to understand that the most powerful people at a school, and that's a great place to start because you got students, people clustered. Most powerful people are not the administrators and the teachers, but the students. You can't have a school if you don't have students. If all the students walk out, the school cannot exist. So it took a while for me to feel that power. Now, I'm not suggesting that you overthrow the organization at Morehouse or Spelman or wherever you're from, but it's a great feeling. I felt so good when I saw what my classmates, and many of us had nothing, could do if we were united, if we were very purposeful in what we were doing. It was just a great feeling. And so, to me, what matters most about what I can say to you is how it will make you feel uplifted and empowered to change things that are not satisfying to you, that are not supportive of humanity. And so, although I can't see your faces because of the lights, I hope that's kind of an impact. I hope that's something you feel. I hope you feel your strength, your ability to make a difference in society. That's what's so important to me.
I'd like to add a comment to that. There was a song that came out of the movement that really had an impact on me. And the song was sung by Sweet Honey and the Rock. It says, "I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around."
Yeah.
And that song became my mantra in life. That I always, when I face adversity, any type of situation, I always turn back to that student movement song, "I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around." And I said, let the white man be out there, but he's not gonna turn me around. I'm gonna do what I want to do, and I'm gonna make it to where I wanna go. Ain't nobody gonna turn me around.
Let me comment while you're thinking about your contributions out there. The Atlanta University Center was united among the students for the first time that any of us were aware of. We had our little competitions between the Morehouse and Clark football teams and all that, and we had you could take classes anywhere in the center if you were enrolled at one of the schools, of course, but we had never come together in a cohesive fashion across school lines to do anything. And I've often wondered whether that has happened again, and if it has not, it should. One of the things that Julius mentioned earlier on, that he was doing the driving and was a lookout and all that. One of the things I mentioned in the film was that a movement is by its nature multidimensional. That involves a deep commitment to high ideals, on the part of a lot of people doing a lot of different things over a long period of time. That was a characterization of our movement. You know, there are a lot of folk who were not prepared to go to jail or even to picket or to sit in, but they would drive. They would stand in a phone booth and make calls back to the office. Somebody would make sandwiches. They would help make signs. But the broader community did even bigger things. We asked them to close their accounts with segregation and open accounts with freedom, specifically to close their bank accounts, their credit card accounts with the major department stores, and to send us their credit cards as proof that they had done so. Hundreds of people did that. The biggest thing of all was that many people put their homes up as collateral to bail us out of jail. Not knowing us individually, I was from Miami. I have no idea to this day who bailed me out of jail. But we had that kind of moral suasion in our movement and that kind of an impact on the population that they were willing to support us in all kinds of ways. So if you're thinking of trying to achieve anything significant, there's several things you should remember. One is, don't expect everybody to do everything that needs to be done or that you're prepared to do. Accept their contribution no matter how small you might consider it to be or how small or insignificant they might consider it to be. Because it's all a part of a big mosaic that makes for the success of the effort. And the other thing is that whatever it is you wake up in the morning that makes you mad, you know, you might want to make a cause out of that and talk to one other person who talks to one other person. Next thing you know, you got a bunch of folk who are concerned about the same thing, and you make a plan as to how you're going to address it. It may be something that you consider relatively insignificant in comparison to the stuff that we were talking about. But that's how the world gets changed.
And if you're doing something for the right reason,
Yes.
people will join you.
Yes.
When we walked into the cafeteria at the state capitol, and they had told us how to dress, as I said, how to behave, this was a serious situation. They didn't tell us anything. They just told us to walk in there. They gave us very good instructions. We didn't expect to eat. But it just so happened when we walked in, the place was empty. Food was still out. The cashier, who was white, was counting the money. And when the black people behind the steam cab counters saw us walk in, and we hesitated because there was no one there to arrest, they started telling us to come. We don't have their names. They just jumped right into what we were doing. Come on. And we were walking along the steam table trying to select food. They started shoving the food toward us. Get the food, get the food, get the food. They were so eager to participate. And as someone said, when we got to jail, the people were so welcoming. You know, we thought we might be beaten or something. I think that was, Junior mentioned that in the film. They were so welcoming and happy to see us. So sometimes, many times, most of the time, when you're doing something for the right reason, people will rally around you and assist. And you just have to get started. I was thinking when the film producer was arrested, handcuffed at Bank of America. My husband always says to me, I forgot, Gwen, must you always be on the battlefield? Well, I went in Bank of America after I had gone for a medical treatment across the street to cash a $40 check. I had a check that a man had given me for something. And I said, I'm not going to keep it a month like I did before. Let me go over here and just cash this check or deposit it. And I walked in, and the man questioned me at the counter. I had an account there, a few $1,000s with him. And he was a black guy, but he told me finally, well, since you don't have a relationship with us, I'll have to charge you $10 to cash this check. And I said, well, no, you're not. And I'm leaving. And I left. I went to PetSmart and a few other stores to do some stuff for my pet. And then I said, I'm going back. I'm not going to walk out of there like that, because they not only treat me like that, they treat everybody like that. This is not going to happen. I walked back in, And when I walked in, I asked to see the manager. She said, would you come to my office? I said, no, I want a form because I want to file a complaint with corporate America about the procedure you have here. And finally, when I explained to her what it was, she said, well, we're going to cash the check. I said, but I still want to file a complaint. And I did. And I mean, that's a small thing. And my husband always says, must you always be on the battlefield? But when something happens to you, think about the other people. And I thought about myself just walking out of there and accepting that. No, I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to do something about a policy that really mistreats people. And they explained to me that I live in a Cascade area. Well, over on Cascade, they probably know you, but we don't know you over here. You don't have a relationship with us, so we're going to charge you $10. No, that needs to stop. Now, that's a small thing I can do, and maybe that's not worth a real fight, but at least I was not going to walk away from that. And that comes from my feeling of if you see something that's going wrong or you see something that's not right, or if you don't feel treated well, do something about it.
Okay, one real quick question. Excuse me, we can barely hear you, but I'm being cut off for time. Yes. Exactly. I got to cut it off. I know, Lydia, I know you're about to say something, but I just wanted to close out real quickly because we were going to have a book signing, and I have the DVDs out there, and
Excuse
Marilyn
me.
has her book, Voyage, which is a really
Ms. Brown,
cool. Yes?
we have one question. She's been
Okay.
waiting for quite some time to ask a question.
Okay, I couldn't see back there. Go right ahead.
Yes, it's not a question, it's more of a comment. I'm from Albany, Georgia, with Charles Sherrod. I was one of the first blacks to attend an all-white school, to integrate the school. And as the gentleman said, he didn't get involved because his parents would have lost their jobs. I was one of, as I said, the first to integrate. And my parents lost their jobs because I became involved in the civil rights movement in Albany, Georgia, with Bernice Reagan, who was one of the founders of Sweet Honey in the Rock. So the comment I like to make is I applaud you all for telling your story. I work with young children in Albany, Georgia, as well as the West End. And one of the things that I tell the children, first of all, I apologize because we've not told our story to you. They've told their story. We must begin to tell our story of the things that have happened to you all. Very few people know about it, but there were so many people during that time that participated, as you said, and school teachers in particular, as your parents or your mother was, could not participate. But everyone was involved, and most of the kids don't realize that, this younger generation. And as we pass the baton to you, we must tell our story, and you must tell your story. And we must not let the media decide, and our leaders, as Judy has said, and what we're seeing now, we're seeing people who really don't represent us on the media. Snoop Dogg and all of those, they ask them for what's your opinion on who's going to be president, why not ask someone who's in politics, who we've elected to that position, who we fought for them to have that position? So I'm telling you, number one, my parents said to me, get an education. And that's what I'm encouraging young people all the time to do. Get an education and write. You must write our stories. And somehow we got to get a platform for you to continue to tell your stories, because you made a great sacrifice. And again, I applaud you, and you of all, thank you for what you've done. Great job. And you must continue. Like you said, if you don't do it, you're not doing justice as a photographer. Thank you.
Please,
Thank you.
Althea, may I say something else? I promise to be brief. You know, I thought when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, I thought about Trayvon Martin. And I thought about being alone. And I remember our parents used to share stories with us in our generation. You don't go anywhere alone. You don't walk in white neighborhoods. If it was the shortest way to get somewhere, driving through a white neighborhood, you didn't even drive through that neighborhood. You drove around it. Somehow, I say, have we disarmed our children by making them think they're free? And have they lost their protection? Because, you know, in my day, we read words on the street would be some Negro or colored person would just leave home and disappear and never be seen again. So that's how we got in the habit of traveling in groups. You didn't go anywhere alone. And my heart was broken when I saw what happened, because these are just people who want to exercise their everyday freedoms like everybody else. But then something unfortunate happens, and a parent gets that call that his or her child has been killed. Oh, sure, it's racism, but the child is still gone. And so there are some things we did. You reminded me of that when you said telling your stories, that some stories we need to tell our children so that they can protect themselves from unnecessary evils that still lurk hidden in society. You expect to leave and ride your bicycle anywhere, but that doesn't happen. And you pay, or your child pays the supreme price. And so I don't think in feeling where we are and launching ourselves into the future, we've forgotten that some of these stories we told our children really helped protect them. And we need to make sure we continue that.
And I want to piggyback on what you said, ma'am, that we need to tell our stories. And we need to write them and to do what Ms. Brown has done, record them. And I wrote this book, but I'm not a writer. I'm a teacher, I'm a storyteller, and I received a lot of oral history from my grandparents. But when I started writing this, I had the story of the sit-in from the 19-year-old perspective. For about 10 years, I had that, and that was all I had. And then COVID hit. And I said, well, I got to get this down so that other people can understand what we did, what it was like to grow up under segregation. And I said, Lord, I don't know how to write a book. The Lord said, sit down every morning in front of your laptop and write. And as I did that, the stories came back to me. The memories flowed back into my mind, and I put them into so this is not a perfect book, but it is a readable book, and I encourage you to buy it because it's going to take you back in time so that you can see what it felt like to be us. And that is going to propel you into yourself and your ability to tell your stories. Go back and talk to your grandparents. Get their stories. They are who you are. And don't forget that. Thank you.
Okay, I really got, they're really pushing me on this.
On the image on her book, the importance.
Yeah, the image on the book was in the movie, and that was at Riches.
That represents an important event in the history of this country that is little known. That arrest took place on October the 19th in 1960, which was 2 weeks before the presidential election between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was leading by double digits 2 weeks before the election. With this arrest of Martin Luther King and Marilyn and Lonnie and some others, it became national and international news. Martin King had been arrested earlier for driving an automobile with a Georgia license plate on it while he still had an Alabama driver's license. This happened in DeKalb County. I was in the courtroom when the judge sat sideways with a comic book flipping pages while the defense was presenting its case. And when Don Hollowell finished, he said, "Are you finished?" 4 months, Reedsville State Prison. So King was sentenced to 4 months in Reedsville. Is a very notorious prison where you often would not come out alive. The guards would allow prisoners to fight to the death, or they themselves would beat prisoners to death. But the sentence was probated or suspended or whatever you call it. So that when King was arrested on October 19, 1960, it was in violation of his parole or probation or whatever you call those things. And so DeKalb County had Fulton County to hold King, and they came and picked him up in the middle of the night and took him down to Reedsville State Prison at like 3:30 in the morning in the back of a paddy wagon with a loose German Shepherd dog while King was shackled in the paddy wagon. King said later that that's the most afraid he'd ever been in his life. All right, this got to be big news all over the country and around the world. And while the Nixon campaign was trying to decide if they should try to do something, the Kennedy folk, who had a black guy on their campaign staff, decided that they would intercede, and they agreed that Bobby Kennedy would call the judge, Judge Mitchell, and they convinced him to let King out of jail after he had been in for, the total thing was like 9 days. There's a book called The 9 Days, 9 Days to Save the Life of Martin Luther King and Elect a President. All right, the Kennedy campaign published what was known as the Blue Bomb, because it was on blue paper, and it spelled out what the Kennedy campaign had done to get King out of jail. It also quoted Daddy King and Martin King and Coretta and 2 or 3 other people in there. Daddy King had said before this that he wasn't sure he could vote for a Catholic for president, which was Kennedy. You must note, too, that black people had continued to vote Republican during this time, partially out of loyalty to Lincoln and, and all that.
Charlie, I gotta go. You gotta go.
We can actually continue this conversation out in the lobby during the book signing. You're going to be out front.
Me in it.
Very quickly, thank you.
So what happened was that this Blue Bomb was distributed all over the country in black communities, and as a result of that, blacks switched to vote for Democrats, and Kennedy ended up winning by less than 1 vote per precinct nationwide. So that picture symbolizes that moment. So it's very important in that context.
All right, I am now going to end this. I really wanted to do this whole thing, but I am going to do part of it since you all took up my time. And that is what the last part of what we've been talking about. There's one song that I think is so apropos that comes from Ragtime called Make Them Hear You. And the last part is, go out and tell the story to your daughters and your sons. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. And tell them in the struggles we were not the only ones. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. Your sword can be a sermon or the power of the pen. Teach every child to raise their voice, and then, my brothers, then will justice be demanded by 10 million righteous men. Make them hear you. When they hear you, will
Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to our filmmaker, Althea Brown. And we are going to now go into the lobby so that you can talk with the panelists one-on-one, purchase the book by Ms. Marilyn Pryce Hoyt, and also purchase the DVD of A Trek to the River's Edge. So we'll let our panelists go out first, and then the audience, members of the audience can file out after they're seated. Thank you all so much for being here, and I hope you stick around and purchase a book, purchase a DVD. Thank you for coming, and thanks to our virtual audience.